Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kyiv, Ukraine. In today's podcast, week 55 of war in Ukraine. In today's podcast, we're going to talk about the long awaited Ukraine offensive campaign, updates from the front lines, and International Criminal Court issues warrant to arrest Putin. So, when will the offensive begin? The US is focused on preparing Ukraine for a major spring counteroffensive to win back its territories. It can begin as early as May, the authoritative American publication Politico reported with reference to US officials. For this purpose, the American military hastily delivers weapons to the battlefield and trains American servicemen at accelerated pace. One of the interlocutors of the publication emphasized that the packages of American aid, starting with 4 or 5 months, were aimed at what Ukraine needs for the counteroffensive. Pentagon officials said after Ramstein 10 meeting, the equipment and training provided would allow Ukraine to win the war wherever and when it chooses to do so. Seems like Kiev has not yet decided on a strategy, but essentially has two options. First, advance south through Kherson to Crimea, or move east from a northern position and then south, cutting the Russian land bridge. The first option is unrealistic, officials say, because Russia has strengthened its defenses on the east bank of Dnipro River, and Ukraine doesn't have sufficient forces at its disposal for a successful, ambitious operation against such forces. However, the second option is more realistic to accomplish, the US officials say, and reminded that after Ramstein online meeting, the head of Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, said that Ukraine cannot waste time. So, what happened at the Ramstein meeting on March 17th of this year? President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke about the results of the 10th meeting in the Ramstein format. Representatives of more than 50 countries discussed ammunition for defenders of Ukraine, artillery, tanks, and the protection of the Ukrainian skies. The head of Pentagon, Lloyd Austin, announced after Ramstein that Sweden will transfer 10 Leopard tanks to Ukraine, and Norway, together with the United States, will provide NASAMS air defense systems. On March 15th, Denmark announced a new package of military aid to Ukraine and the creation of a special fund to support Kyiv. Canada announced also the transfer of 8 Leopard 2 tanks that will come to the front lines in the near future. NATO countries are ready to provide Ukraine with more air defense, armored vehicles, and ammunition, said after Ramstein the Secretary General of Alliance Jens Stoltenberg. In the coming days, Warsaw also will hand over to Ukraine the first four MiG 29 jet fighters, which are fully ready for the use. Polish President Andrzej Duda said this during a press conference with his Czech counterpart Petr Pavel. According to him, such a decision was made at the level of the state bodies. As of today, Warsaw has dozens of these MiGs jet fighters that were received in the early 1990s. And actually, those fighter jets can be easily operated by Ukrainian pilots. The president did specify how many fighter jets Poland will send for the armed forces. The rest of the planes are being serviced and prepared. Their place will be taken by the new FA 50 aircraft from South Korea, the first of which we expect by the end of this year, and then squadrons of F 35, Duda said. The provision of Soviet MiG 29 fighter jets to Ukraine will be a major help. However, they are unlikely to provoke any special changes at the front, said the spokesman of the Air Force Command, Yuri Ignat. Also, Ukraine has already received AMX T 10 RC light wheeled tanks from Paris, French Defense Minister Sebastien Lecornu said. AMX 10 RC just arrived in Ukraine. Some of them have already gone to the front line, he added, without actually specifying the number. On February 14th, Forces Operations announced that France is sending the first batch of 14 AMX 10 RC light tanks to Ukraine. The publication wrote that the Ukrainian crews underwent a training program and those machines. All right, so here's the updates from the front lines. Russian occupation troops, regardless of huge losses, continue to conduct offensive actions in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marin, and Shakhtar directions. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine in the morning summary. The enemy launched more than 75 attacks in the indicated directions. Receiving a strong rebuff from the defense forces, the Russian Federation continues to use terror tactics against the civilian population of Ukraine. However, Russian troops have reduced the pace of offensive operations along the entire front line. So, they used to they used to launch 80 attacks, and about 2-3 months ago there were 80 attacks like that. But as of today, there's only 20 of them. So the offensive in the Luhansk region is close to culmination, and the Russian Wagner Group forces will probably not be able to capture or surround Bakhmut without the reserves of the Russian army. The American Institute for the Study of War wrote about this in the summary based on the results of March 15th. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation persistently thought to achieve success in Vugledar area in the city which is southwest of Donetsk in order to compete with the achievements of the private Wagner group near Bakhmut. It added that Russian attempts to storm Vugledar had almost certainly slowed over the past week. This follows repeated, very costly failed attacks over the previous 3 months. As the British intelligence noted, one of the factors that contributed to Russia's heavy losses is the sector was Ukraine's successful use of remotely controlled anti-tank mines, RAM, a special artillery projectile that scatters anti-tank mines at a distance of up to 17 kilometers or approximately 12 miles. So meat grinding near Bakhmut continues. Since May of last year, the Russian Federation has lost around 25 to 30,000 wounded and killed in the battles for Bakhmut, said Ian Stubbs, senior military advisor of the British delegation to OSCE. These are huge human losses with a total advance of about 25 kilometers only. Over the week, just during one day, Russia lost over 1,000 occupiers and 12 tanks. And since the beginning of the full scale invasion, the Russian Federation has lost 163,000 soldiers, reported the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on March 17th of 2023. The overall speed of Russian operations on the front in Ukraine has decreased compared to the previous weeks. According to Alexei Dmitrozhevsky, the spokesman of the defense forces of the Tavria region, daily Russian ground attacks have decreased from 90 to 100 attacks per day to 20-29. He added that the Russian troops have lost their offensive potential, resulting from significant losses of the troops and equipment. The Russian offensive operation in the Luhansk region is likely nearing its climax if it has not already ended. Although Russia has moved most elements of the least three divisions to the Svatovo-Kreminna line, the analysts noted. They also indicated that the Russians had achieved minimal tactical success in the Luhansk region over the past week, and Ukrainian units have recently counterattacked and regained some territory in the area. As Ukrainian intelligence reported, the Russian military is preparing for defensive operations on the peninsula's territory. Russian Federation keeps on losing troops, so it has no choice but to start recruiting new soldiers, and it plans to recruit 400,000 people. From April 1st, Russia plans to start a new recruitment of contract workers for the army. For this purpose, the Ministry of Defense, the aggressor country, has already sent documents to the regions, Radio Liberty reported. Several Russian regional mass media said that they want to recruit 400,000 people in total to train them and send them to the front lines. But most likely, they will be poorly trained because they don't have much time, because the Russian forces at the front line has a huge shortage of soldiers. Meanwhile, the regular Russian army is in a difficult position. It is poorly managed, poorly maintained, and seriously demoralized. President Vladimir Putin understood this and made a desperate bet. He turned to Evgeny Prigozhin, the owner of the private army Wagner Group, who had organized such a mercenary army, and wanted to prove that his soldiers could perform better than the regular army. Putin allowed Prigozhin to recruit prisoners in Russian prisons. With the help of ex prisoners and at great cost to their lives, Wagner Group began to conquer territory around the city of Bakhmut, while the regular Russian army was stuck or even losing ground in other areas of Ukraine. Putin's bet worked to some extent. The regular army, sensing a threat, started bureaucratic war against Prigozhin, in which it won. The army establishment got Prigozhin banned from further recruiting prisoners, and Wagner soldiers began receiving the wrong type of ammunition. A few weeks ago, the head of the Wagner group, Prigozhin, began publicly voicing his grievances, putting Putin in a difficult position. At first, Putin tried to help Prigozhin, but the establishment supported the regular army and collectively managed to convince Putin that Prigozhin threatened his continued rule. Ukraine took advantage of this internal struggle of Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky consulted with the leadership of his army, which anonymously recommended turning the Prigozhin army through notorious meat grinder while it is in a such disadvantageous position. Thanks to this, the Ukrainian troops will be able to organize a counterattack when they receive the promised modern weapons, especially the modern Leopard 2 tanks. This should happen around May, but it could happen sooner. Putin desperately needs a ceasefire agreement, but refuses to admit that. The head of People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, is in the same boat with him, but the US President Joe Biden is unlikely to jump to him, taking advantage of this imaginary chance to agree on a ceasefire because he promised that America will not conduct negotiations behind Zelensky's back. The countries of the former Soviet Empire, which seek to strengthen their independence, cannot wait for the Russian army to be defeated in Ukraine. And at this moment, Putin's dreams of reviving the Russian Empire will crumble and cease to pose a threat to Europe. The defeat of Russian imperialism will have far reaching consequences for the rest of the world. The crimes of the Russian lead would lead them to the Hague. Russian attacks on civilians in Ukraine, systematic torture, rape, and murder in occupied territories amount to war crimes and possibly crime against humanity. The main sensation of the week is the decision of the pre-trial chamber of the International Criminal Court on the arrest warrant for the Russian President Putin. Without any exaggeration, this is an unprecedented decision. This is not just a decision to arrest the current head of the state. Such decisions were made before. It is unclear. It is a nuclear state with a special status in the United Nations. There was nothing like this before. It is clear that this is not a court sentence or a physical arrest, but it is a legal and moral brand that sharply narrows the space for political maneuver, not only for the Russian dictator, but also for the leaders of the democratic world. For the last few days, the whole world media has been discussing the International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Putin. According to the law, 123 countries must arrest him if he arrives in their territory. Everyone says it is a big win for the world. Agree. It is another step toward isolating and putting new constraints on the Russian dictator. But does it really hurt Putin? Let's be honest with ourselves. Since the war, he has not traveled to countries that are not friends of Russia. Russia has only a few friends left, such as several African countries, Syria, China, North Korea, and few others whose leaders usually fly to Moscow. The dictator created a perfect world for himself, living in castles and lavish residences, with thousands of servants attending him and an army protecting him. Do you think he needs to leave Russia? I don't think so. Do you think any military or special forces will be able to arrest him? I don't think so. As we all understand, he didn't decide to start the war in one day. He has prepared for that decision very carefully since the 2010. This means he has billions or even trillions of dollars in Russia and more spread around the world and managed by his daughters, close family friends, and allies who have been citizens of other countries for several years already. It is truly sad to see that a person responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths will never be punished. So, the International Criminal Court or any other country or institution can issue warrants or sanctions because unfortunately nothing will impact the dictator's regal lifestyle until his death. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening my podcast. Please share our podcast with your friends and listen to our earlier podcasts. Thank you.